So we'll be going over the payroll option in Aldelo Express. Now, most of the setup is done from the cloud. So we're not going to go into the application in this demonstration here. Just to note, if time cards do need to be started or added, that can only be done from the application. And I've already created a video titled Time Card Editing. If you need to reference that video, please feel free to reach out to your manager so they can provide you that link. But the topics we're going to be going over today are the employee setup, the different payroll settings, verifying time cards, and then creating the payroll report. So we're going to move next to my browser, and I'll see you there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go ahead and do here from the Express office is go into the staff. We're going to go ahead and pull up an employee here. We're going to specifically use my employee file here. So you'll see the general information, but what we want to do is go into the extended settings. So we'll go ahead and swipe up till we get to the payroll info, and you'll see the job title there. But the important thing to look at here is pay is hourly. If the employee is to be paid by the hour, you do have to establish a pay rate there. If this setting is turned off, then you are setting the employee up as a salaried employee. So the salaried employee does get a fixed amount at the end of the year, while the hourly employee does get paid the set rate here per hour. So this is where you set up the employee and determine if they are to be paid by the hour or salary. If we scroll to the bottom of the page here, you're going to see the employee is released. Now, one thing to note that I wanted to point out is that whoever manages the pay periods or the payroll, it's best to keep the list of active employees as active. Those employees that are no longer working for the company, it is always best to set them as released. So if you'll notice, if I toggle the employees released to yes, we'll set a date terminated. Okay, so this date terminated falls within a certain pay period. On the next pay period, it will not appear on that pay period. I'm definitely not going to save that, but I just wanted to show you that because once you do get into the pay periods, like I said, if a date terminated was not set for the former employees, the pay period page will have unnecessary employees listed on there, and they'll have to work through it. So I'll show you that once we get into the pay periods. But next, we're going to go into the payroll settings here. So we're going to go ahead and go into the settings, store config, and staff config. Right there, you see the payroll options. I'm going to go ahead and expand that, and you'll see the different pay periods. So they're self-explanatory: weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, and monthly. And then the last day of the work week is Sunday. So all the hours accumulated between Monday to Sunday are accumulated in that week. And you'll also see here there's an initial pay period start date. This is important if they are switching the pay period type. Like if we went from a bi-weekly to a monthly, like in the middle of the month. Let's say they've already been paid for the first 2 weeks. And if you change it to monthly, you want to make sure it excludes the time that they've already been paid for, so they do not get paid double for that time period. So they can set an initial pay period start date to avoid that from happening there. And you'll see the overtime pay percentages. So overtime and double time there. And you'll see the daily overtime pay when hours exceed. And this is set to 8 hours. And the daily double time pay set to 12. And there's also a weekly overtime pay when hours exceed. This is set to 40. So this comes into play for different states. Different states have different rules. For example, in California, there is the standard 8-hour workday. And if an employee works over that 8 hours, anything after that will be considered overtime. They get paid the overtime rate there, and double time, anything after 12 hours, they get double time. But however, in New York, employees can work, let's say, 3 11-hour days. They don't get overtime until they actually exceed 40 hours in a work week. You'll also see that you can also define holiday pay dates there. So if the business is opened on holidays and they want to compensate their employees there, or they can establish the holiday date or dates. So the system will automatically apply overtime or double time depending on which overtime they want to offer for those holidays. Now, time card options, you can see there. You can have rounding minutes. You can establish rounding minutes and clock in and clock out grace minutes. One thing to note, you do have to establish a schedule for these employees in order for this to work properly. And also, the schedule not enforced would have to be set to no. Now, if we go down to the bottom here, you can set it where the gratuity is held under until payroll. This will just record how much tip the employee has been making during that pay period. And on the express device under the cashier, there will not be a tip out option. That tab will not be present as the payroll will be distributed on their paychecks there. Show hours worked as a fraction. This will help to avoid any confusion because if it's set to no, the numbers will reflect as whole numbers, rounded up or down. So if you had an employee that worked 2.4 hours and another 2.4 hours, the hours reflected would show as 5 hours. So 2 plus 2 in this case would equal 5. However, it's 2.4 plus 2.4 equals 4.8, rounds up to 5. So that would be best to have that on. Now, under the POS options, this is where, especially if the employees are going to be, if they are using Aldelo Express to record employee hours, you want to make sure that they do clock in. Now, this first option here, the prompt clock in, this can be bypassed, but it does prompt once they log into the application, but they haven't clocked in yet. And if you have salaried employees, they don't need to clock in. So you want to disable that for salaried employees. The force clock in, unlike the prompt, will force the employee to clock in once they access the application. If they do not, they will not have full access to the POS. So they would have to clock in if this is enabled. Okay, so those are some of the features there. Actually, before we save, I want to go back into the payroll options. And we're going to assume that we're using New York law here. We're going to remove the daily overtime pay. So I will not get paid for daily overtime. Just to show you how that takes effect on a time card here. So if we go into our staff, go to time cards. I'm going to pull up my employee here and go into the previous pay period. Okay, so you'll see that there are certain time cards that are at 8 hours, and anything after the 8 hours is going into overtime. And like I said, if this employee was in New York, they would be getting overpaid there. But because we did make a setting change, what has to be done, you have to go into a time card that does have the overtime applied to it, go into it and just simply hit save. Now you'll see all the overtime is not being applied. So you'll see the top one there. The time card on the 20th, the reason why you'll see overtime applied there, at a certain point, it did hit the 40 hours there. So you'll see the overtime applied there. And then you'll see on the next week, the 25th, you'll see that there's a 7 hours, but that is on the next week. That's why you will not see anything applied there. It doesn't carry over to the next week. That's just to show you how to make sure that the overtime is taking effect correctly based off of the settings there, especially if changes have been made. They do have to be updated in order to reflect correct. And this does have to be done per employee. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go into is the pay period. I'm on my current pay period. The date that this video is recorded is February 7th. However, I want to look into the pay period prior. As you can see here, I have a list of employees. And you'll see my employee file there. Worked 47 hours with 1.85 hours overtime. And you'll see the total hours. And you can also tap on the pay period for that employee just to view more detail there. So what's typically done once the pay period is ready to end, typically go to the very bottom of the page to end the pay period. So at this time, this is where manager or owner would verify all the information, and when they're ready to end it and submit it, they want to end the pay period. So I'll go ahead and end it now. And you'll see it no longer shows on the drop down here, but you would go into the pay period history and pull up that pay period. Now, you can go to the very bottom of the page here, and you'll see that there are certain options. So this is where they would go to generate the report to provide to the payroll specialist. But there is also a reopen pay period option. Whereas if there was a mistake made, they can go reopen it and go back in and make certain edits. But in this case, we're going to go with that everything is complete and verified. We're going to go ahead and generate that report and open it. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and focus on my user here. You're going to see the hours recorded, the overtime recorded, and the total hours there, and how much I will get paid for this previous pay period there. Yep. And you'll see that it is divided by hourly and salary. This document is sent over to the payroll specialist where they take care of any direct deposits and checks if they're distributing checks. All right. So this completes the demonstration for today. We'll see you on the next one.